Hello, everyone. I hope you can all hear me. Welcome to our social gastronomy in practice, where we will deep dive and unpack existing social gastronomy models that exist within our community. And today we will unpack with Über and Tellerrand and how they use the power of food to build social cohesion. Before we start and before I get into it, please in the chat, just type your name and where you're calling from so we can also know who's in the room. So just your name and where you are calling from would be great to also know who's in the room with us today. So I thank you all for being here, and I hope that we will have we'll all have a fantastic time learning and sharing together today. And for those who are new to the social gastronomy movement, we are a global network of people who believe in and who use the power of food for social transformation. I can already see some familiar names and some new names, and I'm so happy and grateful that you're here. And I hope that we will all be able to learn, to listen, as well as to share our own experiences and contribute where we can. So perhaps we can give it 3 more minutes while you're still typing in your names and about 2 minutes, so we can just let others join. I can see some names already. We have Turkey in the house. We have Canada. Amazing. Switzerland. Great, great. Thank you all for joining. Okay, we have Cote d'Ivoire in the house as well. Amazing, thank you. We have Mexico, we have Portugal. Great. Amazing, thank you so much for joining. Okay. Oh, we have London in the house, thank you. Okay, I think we can dive right into our session because I'm excited. I can't wait to hear all about Über and Tellerrand, and our panelists are amazing, and we will be unpacking the model. And like I mentioned, I hope that we'll all be able to listen attentively, to be able to share as well towards the end of the session. So how the flow is going to go today, we'll start with the session with the panelists. So we'll have a Q&A session and just discuss the model and unpack the model. And towards the end, about 10 minutes or 10 to 15 minutes, we should be able to have some time for Q&A from you, our lovely participants, and also any learnings and contributions that you might have in relation to the discussion and the model. Okay, so to kick off our session, I will let our lovely panelists from Über and Tellerrand introduce themselves.
Should I start, Esti?
Sure.
So my name is Hamid. I'm from Jordan, but I've been in Berlin for 7 years, and 5 of which I've been working for Über and Tellerrand. We are an organization that utilizes the power of food with the objective to bring people from different backgrounds and different cultures together. And so in a certain way, we are in the field of social cohesion, but we use gastronomy, food, and cooking as a tool to fulfill our objectives. We'll be telling you a bit more about that after, but I will give you Esther now.
Hello, everybody. My name is Esther. I'm a psychologist, and since 2015, working with Über den Tellerrand in different roles as a project manager, together with Hamid, working with our satellites network that we will talk about later, but I'm also on the board of the organization since 2016.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here today and making the time to discuss your amazing model. So the first question goes to both of you. As we are in the social gastronomy space, I think it's important that we start with this. What does social gastronomy mean to you?
Mhm. Yeah, so I think of social gastronomy by now as an umbrella term that really is incredibly diverse, incredibly rich. And if I want to simplify this as much as possible, it's using food and cooking not for profit oriented reasons, but for social purposes or for the common good. But like this is so diverse that we usually say that whether through the anything that lies from the consumption moment all the way to the production moment or the other way around, and yeah, all the spaces in between.
Yeah, I agree with Hamid. We really use the power of food to connect people and not only see it as we have to eat because we have to feed ourselves, but I see the social aspect of it, sharing a meal, sharing also the culture behind how to prepare a meal, how to eat it, and what it means for your identity also, what you eat, how you eat. So it's yeah, such a rich such a rich area that we can use to bring people together.
I love those. And, you know, I'm just here thinking, about 2 years ago, I did not even know there was such a thing as social gastronomy. I didn't know such a term existed. And, you know, now working in the space, you see all these different models and you see all these different people that are doing amazing things with food, you know, and it goes beyond just consumption. And you even mentioned culture. And yeah, that really sums it up for me as well. And I think my next question is going to go to Esther. So before we get to the what and the how of the model, I think it's important that we understand the why. Why does Über and Tellerrand exist? What is it that you saw that led to the creation of Über and Tellerrand?
Mm-hmm. I will share some pictures real quick. Yeah. Okay, I hope you can see this. So I'm gonna start to talk about why and how we started Über den Tellerrand, why it exists. It actually started about 10 years ago. Oh, now I can't really switch to the next slide. Let me see. Okay, I'll try one more time, and then if it doesn't work, we'll just not see the pictures. Ah, okay. Now it works. So it started in 2013 in Berlin, in Germany, because a couple of students, some of them you can see here as well, tried to get in contact with refugees living in Berlin. They were occupying a square in Berlin, in Kreuzberg. And they came up with the idea to just share meals with people from different cultural backgrounds, because they thought, okay, maybe we might not speak the same language, but we can share meals, we can cook together, and this way get into contact. And it actually worked out quite well. And with this came the idea not only to share meals, but to write them down, the recipes, and not only the recipes, but the histories behind the people who shared the meals together. And this way we developed a cookbook, and it got so successful that this was the starting point of our organization. So sharing meals, cooking together, creating cookbooks, and then from this, all of our activities followed. We called out throughout Germany to invite people to share meals and send us the recipes and the stories. And we created a cookbook out of it, also with the idea to sell the cookbook and to get some funds to finance other activities in our organization. And we still do this until today. So this was really the starting point of our organization. And that was about 10 years ago now. So next year will be our 10th officially our 10th birthday.
Wow, and 10 years is huge. That is a huge milestone. And I'm tempted to ask, do you have anything planned for the 10th anniversary?
Not yet. Actually, today we were just talking among our board members what kind of party we want to do. Because our 5th anniversary was quite big, so we have to have high expectations, I think. It was a huge, huge party. So I don't know, but we are planning something.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. And I really want to dive more into the cookbook, but I think we'll do that in the with Hamid in the next question. Hamid, anything to ask here? Should we move on?
Maybe
Do you want to add something?
Maybe something to add is that it is clear for us where we are in terms of civil society engagement when it comes to the topic of migration and refuge, because where we saw that there was a gap to fill when Über den Tellerrand started, is that there's a lot of people who started coming as refugees in 2013 and also like bigger numbers in 2015. And we saw as a main challenge or problem is that the newcomers had one form of interaction with the host community, which was in terms of support. So civil society and volunteerism supported newcomers with all sorts of issues like integration in the labor market, housing market, psychological support, legal support, and so on. But we came in Über den Tellerrand and said, like, this is all beautiful, but there is a problem here that we're stuck in a helper-helpee dynamic. And in order for social inclusion to really happen and for us to create friendship and get to know each other, we need to meet on an equal footing. And this is where we thought, okay, food is actually the medium that can get us to just meet. There's a German word for it, on eye level, but just really meeting and sharing with each other so much, even with having a language barrier. Food by itself is a language where we can share a lot with each other.
That's amazing. And I love how you quote food. I mean, food is an equal footing, you know, it's like I mentioned earlier, it goes beyond just consumption. Like there's so many ways that food shows up in our lives, in our communities. It is a universal language. Thank you, Maya. It is a universal language and it goes beyond language barriers. And it's really great work that you're doing in the communities. So the next question, Hamid, is for you. So now we want to deep dive into the model. So what does it look like on a practical level?
So, I mean, there are two ways to think, or two important levels when discussing our model. The first is let's say, the traditional one, and this is the organization that started in Berlin. And here our model is, first of all, to fund our activities and the employees who support the volunteers. We are, on one hand, getting funding from different private foundations and from the government. And this is usually project-oriented funding that goes for each project for a year or 2 years under certain objectives and terms and so on. And then otherwise, just like any social enterprise, we also took the direction to think about how we can make our own funds to fund our activities. And the cookbook, for example, falls under that. The cookbook, and we do also cooking classes that are paid. And we did some catering for some time, but we also found out that we don't have the capacity to do that. So we do have this like small business side of activity that we hope will also like maybe one day reach the objective of financial sustainability, which is kind of what every social enterprise aims, but we're still far away from that. And we were lucky that in Germany there were a good number of foundations and the government so to fund organizations that work in this field. This is on one hand, and I think we can talk about our replication model, because in Über den Tellerrand, where we started in Berlin in 2013, by 2018 we were active in about 35 cities in Germany. I would say after Corona, now we're active in about 25 cities, because Corona also was a big challenge for volunteer structures. But what happened is that since 2015, Über den Tellerrand got a really good amount of coverage in the media. And then we started getting a lot of inquiries, phone calls, emails that said, hey, this is a really, really cool idea. We're not in Berlin, but we feel like we would like to implement this concept or think about doing something in our own locality or in our neighborhood or city. And this is when we developed a certain model to try to allow people to replicate within Tellerrand. And this model is based on social capital mostly. So it's based on volunteers in the other city creating what we call a satellite under the umbrella of Über den Tellerrand. It's also based on cooperation, because the volunteers then don't have their own space or their own funds. So they find another social enterprise or a university, or actually any space that offers like a beautiful space to get people together in a kitchen and form a cooperation with them. And then our role was to kind of communicate the know-how, or to do some form of knowledge transfer for the volunteers in order to get the operation going. And then we developed our own toolbox, which is a process from A to Z for the volunteers, starting from how to get volunteers, because if a person is starting this by themselves, then they will have to go on further. Maybe we'll talk even more details about that, but just to say that our model is built on social capital, and volunteers and cooperation is what allowed us to replicate Über den Tellerrand in 30 plus cities, even like some cities outside of Germany.
Yeah, and we even saw that there's somebody from Colombia, so maybe she can also share from Colombia, because there is completely different. Of course, the situation is different than in Germany, but still it's possible to use the model and our network to implement Über den Tellerrand in other cities, but also other countries, like in Austria, or Brno. And we also had a cooperation with Switzerland in Bern. So yeah, it can always be adapted to the local context.
And I think that's a very important point, that adaptability to local context. And that was actually, you partially answered the follow-up question that I had, because, so you have this toolbox that you share for the different communities that want to replicate this model. So could you give examples of how it has appeared differently in the different communities? Because of course you cannot have the same, you cannot have the same processes from start to finish in the different communities. So like, how has it been different how has it appeared different in other communities, in other cities, in other countries? What does that look like as well? Mm-hmm.
The different can vary a lot, or it can be like really simple differences. I mean, first for the communities in Berlin, Über den Tellerrand is active in many cities. Some are big cities like Berlin, Hamburg, or Munich, and other are like much smaller cities. So first of all, like how much volunteers, how much cooperation, how much resources each Über den Tellerrand satellite has to work with is completely different. And then since we do cooperation with different organizations, the organizations themselves are different, and the deal at place is different, and how much the space is possible is different, and so on and so forth. And I would say like also our volunteers could be really different, interestingly. So one satellite in the city of Karlsruhe has been started by university students who wanted to start this as a school project, and then from there the satellite came up. And there are other satellites whose the main volunteers running it are a group of retired women from Germany who are more like 60s plus. And so ranging from students to people who are retired to people who are working kind of already in the field of migration, social inclusion, but then they say, okay, this is a really, really cool idea. And then they say, can we start a project in our organization under the umbrella within Tellerrand? So there are some satellites that can say, we already have space and even a bit of funds. So how much experience each satellite or each group of volunteers offers is clearly different. And therefore, our role is really, really different. And we sometimes need to understand where is Berlin in terms of the support it offers for each group of people. So the difference could be in scale, could be in the visibility of the events themselves, like how people organize them. Really depends on what they would like to do, what kind of food, and so on. We do offer all sorts of suggestions and ideas and models and templates, but we really allow the space for the volunteers to kind of create and express themselves. And sometimes the events themselves are different in the sense. It could be a cultural evening, like let's cook Italian today, or it could be like a completely different concept.
Yeah, I can add two more examples, because we also do not tell our satellites how they should be organized. So as Hamid said, it could be an already existing organization who says, can we use your material? Can we implement Über den Tellerrand concept in our organization, which is of course always possible, but it could be a group of volunteers. But those group of volunteers, they could also say after 1-2 years, we want to be more professional and have our own organization, and it's open to them to create their own NGO. So now there's, I think, 7 or 8 Über den Tellerrand nonprofit organizations in Germany. So we are more like a network and not a super hierarchical organization where we tell people how and when to do events. So for example, in Munich, for a couple of years, the organization Über den Tellerrand Munich, they ran a whole cafe. So they had a gastronomy where they employed people, chefs, and we'd never had something like this in Berlin. We couldn't even tell them how to run a cafe because we never did run a cafe. We did do cooking classes, and in other cities, they wouldn't even do cooking classes, but only community events and so on and so forth. So we really leave it open for the volunteers or employees, because there's also employees in some of the satellites, to see what is needed in their local community and also what they would like to do. And yeah, so it's more like a network where each satellite has their own concept as well. And then one thing that I can add, because we see now a picture of our container, is a container, a cargo container where we built in a kitchen, and this container travels or usually travels in the summer months throughout Germany to small towns where there's no Über den Tellerrand network or organization, and we try to implement events where local people, where refugees can meet at cooking events, and they meet in our cooking container for a couple of weeks, and then we try to make it more sustainable, build a community there that will continue doing these kinds of events once the container leaves the small town. So this is another way how a satellite can be started.
That is really amazing. And one thing I really appreciate is that you mentioned, Esther, that you do not force people to use the different or to adapt everything in the toolbox, you know, and that's very important when you're looking at education. It has to be what fits within our local context, right? What may work there will not work here in Zambia. And I think that's a very important point, that you cannot have, you will have a blueprint, but you will not have the exact same building. And that's very important to note. I think while we're still here, I also want to look at the tools. You mentioned the classes, the cooking classes, the cookbook. Which one would you say has been the most replicated tool in the network? Like, what is that one tool that almost everyone has been able to adapt in the network?
Yeah, I think the core activity that everyone does, I think without exception, I don't know, maybe you have to correct me, Hamid, but I think it's the community cooking events. So people gathering, sharing a meal, one person or more people bringing a recipe, the ingredients. Sometimes we also use surplus food, and then you just create from what you have, but usually it's a recipe, 2-3 people bring, explain how it's prepared, share the meal, clean up together, And I think this is the core activity. It's free for all. It's a very low threshold activity where you can just come. You don't have to speak the language. You don't have to know anybody. And yeah, I think this is still the core activity everywhere.
Hamid, do you have anything to add to that?
No, but maybe just to clear, we use, me and Esther, two terms differently. One is cooking classes and one is community events or cooking activities. And sometimes for the people who listen, that can be, so the core of our events and what we do is these community activities or cooking activities. And when we mentioned cooking classes, this was a completely separate activity that we undergo and this is what I meant, that we offer that for money. This is something that is really on the side, and this is something that Berlin does to kind of fund some of its projects. But at the core of what we do is that we bring people together through these activities, and the cookbooks is also a side element, I would say. It's the social inclusion, is the getting people together physically, that is the core of Über den Tellerrand.
Thank you for that, and thank you for just making us understand a bit more about how the model works and how it appears in the different communities in the network. And I hope that someone out there has gotten a few things, like I have actually a lot. I'm just like, should I start my own here? Maybe. I might just, anyway, I'll call you later about that. But thank you for that. And the next question is to Esther. What are some of the challenges, the major challenges that you faced, are still facing, and what have been some of the learnings from these challenges?
Well, of course, as a nonprofit organization, you always face a lot of challenges. Maybe I'll start with the most common one is the funding. Of course, as we said, we rely a lot on volunteers. People doing what they do for fun, but also volunteers, they need staff to help to enable their work. So having enough funds to pay rent for our kitchen hub, to pay for all the projects, buy the food, pay salaries, this is always a big challenge. And maybe one thing that we learned is that you should never rely just on one financial source. It has always to be a mix with, most of our money comes from project funding, as Hamid already said, from foundations and the government. And of course, I can only speak for Germany and cannot say how it is in other countries. Maybe it's comparable in other European countries. I have no idea how it's anywhere else. So you need foundations and governments who think the work is important enough to give money for, but we also try to win awards, especially awards where you can also get funds with. We also, of course, take in donations. And then we have our business parts. We talked about it before, the cookbooks, the cooking classes, catering, workshops that we give to earn our own money, to be a bit more independent. But also one thing that we learned is it's really hard to earn money with what we do, and we cannot make a business model out of everything. I mean, we work with people, with their history, their culture, and it's really nothing that we can just sell out. It's very difficult to be sustainable in this field, but it helps to have a mix of funding. But at the moment, to be honest, we have very difficult times, and we hope it will be much better maybe soon in the summer. So this is always a big problem. Maybe also connected to this, in the past we separated in the organization the profit and the non-profit part, which was also not very helpful. So I would recommend everybody, I mean, this is also very specific for Germany, not to create different entities within the organization, because it always creates more work. and more conflict if you divide, okay, what is for profit and what is not for profit. So it works much better with us to have it all under one umbrella organization. And then what else? Also, maybe one rather general thing that we learned is that you always have to adapt to your surrounding. You always have to implement and even organize projects with the group that you want to target, with your target group, because only this way it will be accepted and will be impactful if you work with your target audience. And if it doesn't work, be brave enough to try out something new. I mean, I said Über den Tellerrand was founded 10 years ago, and a lot has changed since then, and the organization, of course, also has changed. This may be some of the challenges. I don't know if you have anything to add, Hamid.
Well, there are many challenges. There's always more to add. I will add one that I believe could be interesting as well. One challenge that we have is in terms of the language we use and the rhetoric we use, and it's because of that. I mean, we started as an organization specifically because of the refugee topic, and then we wanted to create spaces where the host community and the newcomers can get to know each other. Later on, we kind of understood that we got out of this dichotomy that society is kind of split into two groups, refugees and non-refugees. And then also the newcomers, after like a few months of being there, they also realize that there's a fetishization in German society about this term. And then if people want to come to a certain activity, they want to come as themselves, or as the person from this nationality, or from this gender, or from all the different elements that identify a person, but not as this reductionary term called refugees. So this as an organization took us a while to, of course, to understand, but this was part of our development, and we kind of let that one go, and we changed our language, and we are now thinking of ourselves as an organization that bring people from different backgrounds, cultures, interests together to get to know each other. And yet, as Esther mentioned, we're really dependent on funding. And the funding that we usually get from foundations and organizations is based on us creating social inclusion to refugees. And therefore, we kind of have this other stakeholder that we need to kind of align, to start with our application language, but sometimes something on our website, and there's a contradiction here that we always try to maneuver to, let go of this reductionary term and understand that all people are the same, and then this will enrich our activities, or sometimes do certain compromise in our language to justify that we are working in this field. But this also can have a negative effect on people who would say, well, I would love to come and have a cooking activity and get to know people, but I'm not coming as this objectified term called refugee. I will come as Hamid, so this is still challenging, and it's always an interesting conversation that we have, and we try to kind of maneuver around and understand.
Yeah, it's super challenging. Also, the way we understand meeting on eye level. Hamid used the term before, and we try to create spaces where we can truly meet on eye level and not see the differences. But the reality is we are different. We do not have the same possibilities. We have not the same language sometimes. And we, outside of Über den Tellerrand, we are not on equal footing. So we really try to create a different space at Über den Tellerrand, but it's very challenging because the reality is different. So it also can create conflict even among the team members because we are very different, and it's a constant process. And we have to be very critical also and look at ourselves, how we work together. If we really create spaces a working environment where we can all be equals.
Yeah, indeed, indeed. I love that. Create spaces where we can all be equals. That's beautiful. And I love what you said, Esther, about being brave to start to start something new. And I think that also ties into what Hamid said about, oh, you had to learn and change the language. And I think that's a very important point to say. There's always learning, right? Like you never stop learning. You're always learning new ways. And how do we do this better? How do we, change from this to this? And I think that's very important to share. So thank you for that. So the last question I would like to ask is, what advice would you give to someone who is looking to replicate the model in their own communities? What should they start with? What would that look like from start to end?
Yes, the short answer is send us an email and we'll send you our toolbox, which is because our whole model was based on allowing people to replicate and do some form of knowledge transfer. But what would be the process in the toolbox and the process that we would try to accompany somebody new to do it? And the first step, if it's one person who's getting in touch, is that they need to win over a couple of other people to start with. It's really, really good to start as a team and not to get overwhelmed. And from that, when you have a team of 2 or 3 people and then have a common vision together, the next step for us is to find a cooperation, is to find a certain space or enterprise, or it could be a church, or it could be a university, and who would say, I love this idea, here's a space, and maybe even fund a couple of activities. From there comes the idea, the notion of let's do our first event. Let's start step by step. And then we set a date to do our first event, to kind of like get the community together. And here comes the question, how do I reach out for my stakeholders, for my target groups, the people who I want to invite? And this, of course, then depends really on the locality. Where are people staying? Which diverse group of people I want to bring to this activity? Is it on a generational level? Is it on an ethnicity level? And then kind of when it's people on the local level, they can do a bit of mapping, like where can we put a couple of flyers, or where can we do online? Where should we put our event to win some people over? And for me, this is kind of the first package. Like, let's get the first event going. And from the first event, we sit down again and say, okay, who did we reach out? What went wrong? What went right? And then like kind of plan the sequence of the next few events. It's really, really important to think, do I do and reach out online or offline? Do I do an event first time for 15 people or 25 people, depending also on the space? And then there's a question is like, if I'm doing a cooking activity, who's paying for it? And how we figured that one out is that we have a donation box in each event. And with people putting something on the donation box, it really funds pretty much the shopping list for that day. So like most satellites actually are funded and are created with no cost at all, when it's through cooperation, volunteering, and then the participants fund the only cost that we have through this donation box. And you need to be a bit strategic with this donation box. You can't just put it on the side and expect that it pays for the bill. You gotta like mention it a couple of times in the event. So this is also a very concrete advice that we mention. And then we can go much more concretely how to decorate the space. Because if we want to create spaces for people to meet on eye level, then how do we do that? How do we start with an icebreaker that gets a person who might be introverted going and talking a bit more to people? Or how can we start interesting discussions? And we usually give a lot of tips for our volunteers about how to, on the day, create the event, design the space, and so on.
That's very interesting. I love the donation box. You have to be strategic. That's true. You really have to be. Esther, anything to add?
No, nothing to add. Maybe just to stress that we really try to advise everybody to start small and then grow organically, because some people reach out to us and they say, oh, we want to do what you do, and they want to do 5 different mentoring programs, kitchen container and cooking classes and things like that. But it took 10 years for us to have this portfolio of activities. So, and we started with simple cooking events, and this is also what we try to tell people: start small, try it out, see if you actually like it. Because organizing cooking events and cooking, it's messy, it's a lot of work. Not everybody likes it, so you should really start small, and then also see what your community needs. And if there's already so many spaces where people can meet, maybe it's not needed in your local community. Maybe they need something else. Maybe they need job trainings or whatever, I don't know. So really try to base it on the needs of your local community and start small, step by step.
Yeah, those are two very important points. Assess the needs of your community and then start small. And I think that's a very timely reminder that, you know, should be reiterated every now and then to whoever wants to start a model in the community. Start small and assess the needs of your community before you start. I think I'd like us to go a bit back to the groups, because you mentioned, Hamid, the different groups that approach you to replicate the models. What kind of groups have you had? What kind of groups approach you? Churches? Could you talk a little bit about that?
So it can range from, many times it's one person who loves the idea and sends an email, and it could be a person who is either loves food and to utilize gastronomy and the power of food, or it could be a person who understood how we started and is mostly focused on social cohesion and then thought, this tour is really interesting. And then like it could be one person, or it could be like, I mentioned one example, university students getting in touch, or another example that also doesn't so rarely happen is actual organizations who are active in the field, and then they want to start a new project, and then they think, this model from Über den Tellerrand is interesting, and we would like to do it under the umbrella of Über den Tellerrand. So yeah, it could be that the person who gets in touch is a person who says, yeah, I have some funds, we have a space, and he's also like a paid employee. So then this process is completely like a radically different process than one person who's now volunteering, trying to find time to get on the Zoom call, and then thinking, okay, how do I fund the first project, and where do I do my event? And it's everything in between, in terms of how much capacity they have and how much experience. And
yeah, that's very true. And I think throughout the discussion, funding has been one of the most consistently brought up topics. One question I'd like to ask, you mentioned you have a mix of funds that you pull from. What would you say has been the most consistent or close to consistent?
Government funds and foundations, but we do constant fundraising, and this is also something that we can also help our volunteers to do, but you basically have to be almost a professional fundraiser, because to get government funds, it's a long process. It's not super easy to get. What we also do is get donations from companies, but also not only donations in money, but also could also be equipment, for example. So it's really a mix. Yeah, but of course, big grants for a project that can run for 5 years is the best that we can always hope for, because it gives us some stability. We know, okay, for the next 5 years, we have this amount of employees, we have the money to for the shopping, for the groceries, and then also some of the money that we can distribute in our network, but we can only distribute what we fundraise. So yeah, it's constant process.
Yeah. That's amazing, and I think it's important information, because funding is one of the challenges that sort of cuts across. You know, everyone at some point has experienced it, and it's just nice to know how have people been able to sort of navigate it and things like that. Thank you so very much for the amazing discussion. I have learned a lot about Über den Tellerrand, and the model, and it's very exciting, making me think about starting my own here, but we'll see. We'll see. Thank you so much for those insights, and we have come to the end of our panel session. So now we will open up to a Q&A. We'll open up for questions, contributions, any reflections from the discussion. Please feel free to unmute yourself. Oh, we already have one. Margaret, please feel free to unmute yourself.
Hello. First of all, thank you for this, because it's really inspiring for me with my own project, and I would really like to reach out to you by email. So I hope you'll be sharing your email. I'm wondering if you have considered at any point or might consider using a sort of subscription or membership model to get monthly donations, because this is something I'm considering on a sort of pay what you can basis.
Yeah, it is that we have some members that donate on a regular basis monthly, but it's like between 5 to 50 euro a month, or maybe half a year. So we do have this kind of concept, but also this, if you want to have this kind of support group, of course you have to reach out to them, and then when they donate, of course you have to get in contact with them all the time. So it is also a big effort, and we haven't had, I don't think we have put too much effort in this kind of fundraising yet, but it's really something that is a good idea. But we do not take money from our volunteers or the satellites, so you can use our name and our material. This is all free of charge. We never charge for this.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking about regular participants or people who want to be always updated or want to, and there, I mean, there are, plenty of, payment donation sort of systems where there's no maintenance on your part, that I'm personally looking at. But anyway, oh, good. There, I see your emails there. So thank you very much for this. It's very inspiring.
Thank you. Anyone else? Please feel free to unmute yourself, or you can leave a question in the chat. I see we have one. Alexandra, I hope I pronounced that correct. Are there recipes you cook together vegetarian or not?
So as we said, I mean, if we're talking about the entire network, we do not also impose on the volunteers and the satellites what they should do. So it's quite different. We have satellites that sometimes only cook vegan for an extended period of time. And this is because the volunteers who are there says, hey, this is our values, and we would like to conduct the cooking activities in 1, 2, 3, 4. And then you can have satellites that quite often or almost always there's meat or chicken or something that is non-vegetarian being offered. Yes. I think maybe if this could touches the question, I think in the last 3-4 years, there has been a motion more and more that many satellites do cooking activities that are either vegan cooking activities or vegetarian cooking activities, and even like trying to bring the topic of food sustainability and food consumption and the environment and so on. So suddenly a lot of volunteers, because of their big interest in this topic, are kind of utilizing the power of food, not only to bring people together, but then to spread awareness about 1, 2, 3 during the activity or the event. And it's something we support with, like we usually have a big conference or a big meetup for 3 days for an entire weekend once a year for our volunteers. We invite 40 volunteers from the entire organization or from the entire network. And in the last years, because we try to adapt to the interests of the participants, we are now always offering a workshop in terms of like food sustainability or the connection between climate change and migration, and what kind of consideration should that ask of us in our activities and events and so on. But it's a voluntary process, and we let the flow and community decide on their own.
Mhm. Yeah, and if there's dishes with meat, we always try to provide at least a vegetarian version, so not there's nobody left out. But many traditional dishes, they are with meat. So how can you cook your favorite, like homemade your favorite dish that your mom used to make, and maybe there's fish and meat included, and if you leave it out, then people would say, okay, but this is not it, this is not home. So here we are also quite open to include meat, fish, or sometimes both in one dish if this is the recipe.
Yeah, no, that's true. Thank you for that. We have two hands raised, Merv and Christoph. Merv, you can go first, and then we can have Christoph next.
Oh, hello. I'm from Turkey. My name is Merve. I'm a PhD candidate, actually. I'm recently examining the social gastronomy movement. But in Turkey, we have the restricted area and small decrease incentives, actually, or lack of the sponsorship, maybe. How is the German government doing that? How is your funding process, actually? I want to learn about that, and I want to learn how is your empowerment, maybe, or participant for these food policies or food fund. Am I clear to express that?
Maybe a bit more on the second point. How is, what about, which policy do you mean?
Yes, food policy, or what is the Syrian diasporas, how the German government actually protect their diasporas or culture, especially in the food. I want to learn how is the funding process?
Esther, should
The funding process, of course, as I said before, Germany is probably not representative for many other countries, but the government, like maybe it's not maybe on a government level, but the ministries on a regional level or on the state level, there's different funds. So if the government has the goal that integration of refugees into German society is important, then they will open up funds where you can apply for. So they would say, okay, there's this kind of money for certain kind of activities, and you can apply and get grants for this specific work. And you will get grants to implement activities for social cohesion, intercultural exchange, engage volunteers. So these are all things and values that are important for the government and were in the past couple of years, but we can always see, like, if there's a new government, maybe they will see, oh, maybe this year is not so important, integration or migration, we want to focus on climate change, and then there will be funds against climate change. So it's always dependent on the resources and the motivation of the local or the regional or the state government.
So Merve, it's really quite a concrete process. So it's either like a certain public institution in the government or a private foundation. Usually they would say we have a fund of, I don't know, this amount of money, and we would like to fund 3 organizations who work in the topic, let's say, for example, refugees, but then they would also mention what are the focus points of these organizations. With a concrete deadline of the application and the maximum money that we can apply for. And then they would have a really specific application process where we explain ourselves, our objectives, which indicators we will use to show them later how we use the money and how we fulfill And then like it depends on which organization. Some are really would have like a terrible application process that would be so demanding, and others will be more relaxed. And so this really depends on them. But it's usually also for a year or 2 years. So it also comes with, doesn't allow us for long-term planning, and also the uncertainty of it. And it's quite demanding. It's one of the challenges of work, that a good amount of our energy would go into administrative work and bureaucratic work to get the funding, or to get the money again every 3 months and so on, instead of actually into our core work. And in Germany, it is really different than Turkey. It's also like really different than most EU countries. Like when you compare Germany to Italy, Greece, and
it's not the issue, actually, not German and German versus Turkey. I want to add one more question, and thanks for your answer, maybe. What would you recommend to us, actually, in Turkey, entrepreneur, maybe? I want to your advice in this field.
Actually, a couple of years ago, before Corona, I was at the conference in Turkey that brought together different organizations working with refugees. And I was really surprised, because I thought in Turkey, this will be so irrelevant what we do. It will not be applicable. But I met organizations also from Istanbul who did quite similar things. They had a kitchen space where people met for community cooking events, but also to prepare food that they would sell, to have an income. So really using food and gastronomy also as a tool for job market, to make a living, earn money, and yeah, it's hard to say. I could not recommend you anything because I don't know the situation. But I remember that I met a lot of people who did similar things. So I would maybe just recommend to reach out to those who do similar things in Turkey, because I suppose the situation will be much different than in Berlin or in Germany.
Okay, so we have two more minutes to go, and we have one last question, I assume, from Christoph. So please quickly ask your question. Hello.
Yes, hello. Thank you so much for the presentation. I was very refreshing to hear about social gastronomic project where the focus felt really much more on the social than entrepreneurship side of it. And it's I think this is very important in our field to focus on this side, on the social side of it. And the question, you said throughout the presentation that you were talking participants and volunteers, and I was wondering if when the intention is to bring communities together, trying not to tokenize refugees in like specific roles of people needing something from society. What's the proportion of a refugee deeply involved in these projects, in these activities? Are they more volunteers or participants, and how is the power divided? Well, the power dynamics divided in such a project. We run in Montreal a very similar project called A Dream in Your Plate with a refugee woman. And that was always at the core, the heart of our reflection, like how are they not just, how can we not just consider them as, as participants when they have so much that they're going through with immigration papers, poverty sometimes, and all of these issues, like how can they really be involved and, support and make these projects live and, really embrace these projects. So I don't know if it's clear, but that's a question we have here a lot. So I was just wondering, what was your thought on this?
So for us, this was an interesting also indicator and criteria to evaluate our work. And throughout time, it was really clearly visible that it changed a lot. So from Über den Tellerrand in 2014-13, the volunteers who were organizing events, getting things together, were only like from the host community and from the newcomer community. 2015, this changes. 2016, this changes. And as I mentioned to you, every year we invite 40 volunteers for this weekend. And I think we moved by 2019 to almost having 50-50 of 40 people in the Congress. Maybe the Congress here is just a really good sample to show how much activity in terms of the organizing teams come from with a refugee background. I would say like it could have reached 30-40% on the whole of the volunteer team at a certain point. I think now it's a little bit less than a height that it reached. It would be interesting to contemplate why and how. But yes, this has been it's a huge development. For one reason, I think there are changes from the two sides. On one side, those who were the recipient of or being participants in the events after 1 or 2 years are much more empowered now to support others or to like now take a step ahead. Language played a big role, and I think this played a big role into actually being able to come for the weekend and take part in the workshops. So on. So language was a tool also to like really fix certain power structures that you mentioned, because then suddenly you have a voice on the table and you can voice your opinion and so on. And something that we worked on, and I think that also the host community side worked on, is kind of understanding what the gist of your question is, that there are power dynamics at hand and that we need to actually visibly and intentionally create a certain space or a certain structure that would allow other people a bigger role or a bigger voice despite these hierarchies. And we tried to do that in our team, also the employees in Berlin. And we also tried to do it to spread awareness about this topic in terms of workshops that talk about anti-racism, or we have workshops that says, hey, what does on an eye level even mean, which is kind of our motto. And then we sit down and we really try to discuss power structures and hierarchies and so on.
And it's a constant topic. I mean, we just had a team meeting about this like 2 weeks ago because it's always a topic, and we try to address it openly, because also within our team, we try to be diverse and not only be white university students who can manage a project, but in order to manage a project in Germany, you basically have to be a German native speaker, because it's so complex and complicated. It's so difficult. And then you already have the power structures. You have the managers, and then you have the people who do different things. And we also have to think about like, what do we value within our teams? Do we only value people who can fill out an Excel sheet and communicate with I don't know, bureaucrats in Germany? Because of course not everybody will be able to do this. So it's really tough, and we constantly have to try to create an environment where all people can bring out their talents and then also be work together as equals. But we know reality is different, and sometimes we also have to face it and also talk about this. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you for taking those questions. So we are a little over time. It's 4:04. I don't know if you are comfortable with one last question, or do we have it emailed to you? Can we do one more?
Yes, of course.
Okay. Okay, so we have the last question. How many participants from Ukraine do you have?
I don't know the numbers, but of course now it's much more since the last year, of course, because before the community, like many were rather like from Arab-speaking countries, but now of course there's a lot of participants, volunteers. We have talked about the difference like about this before, but in Berlin, for example, we have one activity that's taking place every week. It's called Peace Cafe, and many of the participants, but also organizers, are from Ukraine. So we have a little community within our community, but we try not to have events or programs directed to only one target group, because this will not create a sense of we all do this together. So yeah, this is why it's called Peace Cafe, because we want peace everywhere, not in one specific country.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I love that concept of the Peace Cafe. Ahmed, any last words?
I mean, on this topic, I think it could be more. And Peace Cafe is really interesting, and I noticed this in other events, because the idea was to bring the Ukrainian community that arrived also together with other communities. But then what happened is that Peace Cafe is, like, let's say it's 80% plus people from Ukraine and cooking Ukrainian food, and then people who get excited about the activity and come, then they don't understand the language, and it's really difficult to find your place.
Yeah.
And for some time, we were trying to work it out differently alongside our concept. But there's also another opinion that this space of meeting people from your country at this traumatic moment and cooking your comfort food has created a certain space, And so we kind of sometimes we say, okay, if it's happening this way at this moment, then maybe this is what the need is. And then with other cities, there hasn't been a specific event to target this group, and therefore the people who came from Ukraine are just joining a normal activity, and the number is increasing, and our volunteers are also actively trying to also maybe make a flyer in Ukrainian language, or try to adapt their reach out strategies. I would say it could be bigger in a certain, it's not a huge number, but it's surely visible.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. That was our last question, and we have come to the end of our social gastronomy in practice. I had a great time. I hope you did too. Thank you so much, Esther and Hamid, for taking the time to speak to us and just share your model. I'm inspired. I know that everyone else is as well. And I'd also like to thank you for showing up and asking questions and contributing. It's been a great session. And I think they provided their emails in the chat. In case you want to reach out to them, please feel free to do so. I have also shared the Social Gastronomy website as well as email address, so you can reach out to me as well. Thank you so much, and I hope you all have amazing weekends. And please stay tuned. We have these sessions every month, so to be the last Friday of the month, and hope to see you as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.